Hello, my name is Rick Doten. I'm the Managing Principal with Verizon Business Security Services. Today is a very hot June 10th, 2008. And the reason why I'm telling you the date is a lot of the references I'm going to be discussing will be around this spring, this fall, a few weeks ago, and things like that. Today I'm going to talk about cybercrime. I'm going to talk about who the bad guys are, what they're doing, how they're getting you as an individual, and most importantly, what you can do as an individual to be able to protect yourself, your organization, your friends and family when you're surfing the internet. I start my first slide with Sun Tzu's The Art of War. It's very important to understand that in this definition, if you know your enemy and yourself, you will not fear the result of 100 battles. If I just told you what you need to worry about and not what you can do to protect yourself, then that's not really helping. Similarly, if I try to tell you here's all the things you can do and not really explain what the risks are, then again you won't be fully prepared to protect yourself. And so that's kind of the theme of what this presentation is going to be about. I have 5 sections in which I will be discussing the different risks from the cybercriminal activity: hacking, social engineering, malware, social networking, data loss. Each of these sections will have good examples of what these are and also specific things you can do to protect yourself from these kinds of threats. The idea is to be able to give you the tools to lock it down and defend and protect yourself. This first slide is one that I change every time I update this presentation. And this is because this is the most current and most prevalent threat that's out there. Today, it is web attacks. So a user is going to a website, and what he or she doesn't realize is the site has been defaced, but not like we've seen before in years where they will put a big skull and crossbones on it and give shout outs to their friends. What they did is put a very simple script on this site that is hidden from view. The site looks completely normal otherwise, which then references one of their own hacker sites. And this hacker site has a number of different things that it's going to try to do to infect the user going to this site. So a completely normal looking site that you go to redirects you to get some content from a rogue site that comes down and tries to infect you. We call this drive-by downloads. The reason why they've moved to this vector is because we've gotten a lot smarter in not opening attachments and not reading spam and the things that they traditionally have been doing. And so now they want to try to get us where we're not looking. And so now that you understand that this is really a major threat vector, let's talk about how some of these sites get to this way to be infected. Netcraft in January of this year talked about it, and they reviewed 155 million rogue websites that had malicious content such as the one that I described. 83 of these were actually hacked sites. They weren't the ones that you would suspect to be rogue. They weren't, phishing sites or gambling sites or gaming sites or things like that, porno sites. They were sites that were infected. So how are these legitimate sites being infected? Well, we have 5 different ways that happens, and it's in my little section of how good websites go bad. The first is the websites are insecure in of themselves and therefore are open to an exploit that a hacker could use to infect it. The first example here is the Super Bowl page from a year and a half ago. This was one of the first times we saw this, and this site was infected and defaced, and we went to go look at it thinking we're going to find some logo of some hacker group, and we found it looked perfectly normal. When we looked closely, we found the exact same, a similar script, very similar to the one I showed on the previous screen. And what it was it was pointing to a Chinese hacker site that was using this malicious code to pull World of Warcraft user accounts and passwords. And that's all it did. If you were a user that went to this and were infected and then went to a World of Warcraft online game, and it would take your user ID and password and store it off and send it off to China. We looked at it and said, wow, that was a very simple thing. You could do a lot worse things than that, and you'll see some of the worst things they're doing now that they see this capability. Another one that happened last year was this Italian website. There was a web hosting firm in Italy that had dozens of websites, actually hundreds, that were infected in a very similar way. We called it the Italian job. The Bank of India last year was similarly infected. India is a very large country with lots of folks who are using this, and so trying to get the biggest amount of infections they can. They went to a popular site. This is a football site in Europe. Just recently, Harry Potter site that was infected. It really doesn't matter what it is. They're looking for open doors. They're rattling doorknobs, looking for sites that they may be able to infect to be able to get more users. The second way is anytime there is user-generated content. And an example of a message boards here for climbing, anywhere where someone could enter in some kind of thing like statement or opinion, all they would have to do is put in this syntax I'm talking here, which is exactly the same thing I showed on the very first slide. Script, malicious code, and then closing the script. Your browser will render that and execute whatever it is between those two those two pieces of those two scripts instead of putting it on the screen. And this could happen really anywhere. So anytime where MySpace or any news group or message board. In fact, Wikipedia had something similar like this almost happened to them last year. That almost got by the screeners where someone tried to put in some rogue scripting. The third way is these banner ads. A lot of legitimate sites have these banner ads that rotate through depending on the time of day or certain attributes about the user they may know. And these banner ads, we don't really have a lot of visibility into who wrote them initially as a website, let's say, who has this banner posted on them. And we don't know where it's stored. So there's a couple of places there where it was immediately, infected when it was written, or someone stumbled upon where the code was for all these banner ads and kind of went in and infected them all. And so we'll sometimes see them coming from banner ads. The fourth way in going to our Web 2.0 world that we're in is these third-party widgets. And so if I have a MySpace or Facebook page and I want to fancy it up, I may pull something like similar to one of these things. Obviously, this is June. Gas prices a lot less now than less back when I pulled this image. There are different things that similar to the banner ads. We don't know who wrote these. We don't know where they were stored or what they were infected. And most people aren't programmers to kind of look at the code and see that there's nothing malicious about them. So they may pull a clock or your birthday to track your friend's birthday or certain things like that, and put them on their pages to add some value to the people who come to it. But they're really actually introducing risk to them. And then finally, there's sometimes where they will just pop up a message indicating that the user might be infected to try to lure them to click on the box to take them to a site or download something or something like that. This one is indicating that your machine has been infected and click here to download an anti-spyware package to clean yourself up. It's really not meant to do that. Now, a lot of people say, well, don't I have antivirus, and isn't that protecting me from these things? Well, yes, you do, and keeping it up to date is very, very important. But one of our other security groups ran 1,066 pieces of current malware against a bunch of the engines of all of the anti-spyware packages and found that only 37% detected it. And I'll show you an example of why this is, actually, reason why this is. But, and not to say that antivirus is not good, but it's just one piece of a very large, layered approach to be able to protect yourself. And the most important piece is actually the user education, which is why you do presentations like this. I'll be talking about the hacking and in this section, and really starting off with who the folks are. We have traditional hackers, technical terms actually crackers, who are actually trying to break into different sites or applications and things like that. They are certainly a threat. We have botnet operators. A botnet is if one of these hackers took over 10,000 machines through one of maybe the methods that I described before and had them all under control of one of their servers to be able to do different things, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. They'd become a botnet operator, a robot network that they'd be in control of. Spammers, which is still some of the root of all of the problem. We send out there's lots of spam that we get, and that may be to try to sell you something. It might be to lure you to a phishing site. Might mean to phishing site where you're lured to try to give information to the site that's not legitimate. And also spamming might be just trying to infect you in and of itself. And then when you're infected, you may turn into some box that sends out more spam. It's kind of this circle of life kind of thing. Phishing is certainly a risk. The spyware and malware authors, who traditionally were doing it more for ego and defacing websites and doing things and making viruses to get street credentials, now they're under the payroll of organized crime and cybercrime institutes who are trying to make money off of them. Insiders, which we need to put in because the insider set's still really great. And I'll have a couple of slides talking about insider threat. The terrorist organization, which interestingly, after 9/11, we were worried that terrorists were going to attack us from a cyber vector, and but until we were watching that for a long time, but realized that what they did was they kind of utilized the organized crime and the cybercrime to fund their initiatives, because they're more wires and pliers type of folks, and not the hackers and crackers and things that I'm talking about here. And so they kind of use it as a tool to help fund their initiatives. Foreign intelligence service, every organized, industrialized nation has a group that is dedicated to this, because we know that it's not just land, sea, air, but now in cyberspace that we're going to need to worry about. And then finally, the people who are at the core of it all now, which are the cyber criminal groups, who have found a way to make money off of this, and using some of the people that I've mentioned and some of the techniques I'll be talking about here, this is how they get paid. And they have a good structure in doing that. This list, incidentally, actually came from the National Institute of Standard and Technology of Cyber Risks. This isn't, I agree with all of these different elements on the list, but it's something that you can go find yourself from the NIST page. So now that we've seen what the greatest, most common threat vector is today from the websites, and we've seen a number of ways that websites can be infected to get to users, and we've now learned who those folks are and kind of why they're doing what they do, let's talk about what they're doing with the information. So here's a description of one of the Trojans that infected the users and was able to gather information. So let's say this woman has been infected through one of the methods I described below. She and all of her neighbors in her neighborhood, or people around the world who are similarly infected, continue to go online and surf the web, and they pay their bills, and they go to do online banking and buy stuff online. And little do they know that all of their personal information is being sent to this hacker database. In this particular case, it's in Russia, where any user IDs and passwords, credit card numbers, and other personal information is being siphoned off and stored in this database. Now, this database is now then accessed by other criminals to buy this information. They'll log into this page, and it's a very sophisticated e-commerce site that has shopping carts and different ways to pay, and I don't think it has a wish list or anything like that to send to your friends, but they can in an organized fashion, buy different types of information, from a Skype account, a World of Warcraft account, bank passwords and things like that. And this is the way that these folks are making money, and on both sides they're getting money for this information that they've harvested, and they're also these folks are using this information to be able to do identity theft and other kinds of things. The World of Warcraft, similar to Second Life, we're seeing a great trend in using these kind of virtual reality worlds to launder money, because they all have their unit of currency that has some kind of value. And so that's an interesting trend that we're seeing. The root of all of this is really the botnets. It's the engine that runs and is the capability for this to happen. And what it is, as I mentioned before, a lot of machines that have been infected in one of the ways that I mentioned, and there's millions of them out there right now. A lot of them are used for relaying spam. But when they're under control of an individual or a group of individuals, then all of these machines can do quite a number of things in a very powerful way. Distributed denial of service, where all 10,000 of these little bots all over the world will aim at somebody and try to starve their resources. We saw an example of this in Estonia last year. Relaying spam, and by understanding and hosting phishing sites, understanding that on the cybersecurity side, we're very quick to be able to identify spamming engines and also phishing sites. And so what they do is utilize their large numbers to be able to try to hide. So this little guy here may be relaying spam for an hour, and when we see it and we try to stop it, it's gone and moved on to this guy who relays for another hour. Similarly, some bank may have a hosting site, phishing site that they're hosting. against a bank on this guy for an hour and this guy for an hour, and this kind of rotates through. So they're utilizing the numbers to be able to move very quickly, so that if someone identifies and tries to take it down, it's already moved or it will move very soon. While they have control of these boxes, they'll do it for, like I described in the previous Trojan, capturing different credentials or passwords or, social security numbers or credit card numbers and things like that. And this, as a unit for this bot herder up here, is a way that he or she makes money. And they will sell bot time for 10 minutes for $500 for 10,000 of these things to other people to relay spam or do whatever they want. The interesting statistic is 85% of spam originates from botnets. And remember how I said that spam is this circle of life. Spam will get people infected, which turns them into botnets, which then relays more spam and does these other things, and it just keeps going around and around. And so that's why we call this kind of the engine of all of this cyber criminal activity. But what's kind of startling about this is two things. One, how easy it is to be able to do it. This is a Botnet Configurer. This is a hacker tool to create my own botnet. It's a very simple application to use. It's very well written. You can get updates from the group who wrote this. My 12-year-old can manage this. And you also see that there's different macros here for having different phishing sites that you can host for different banks that you can see here, Chase or Bank of America or USAA, to be able to do a couple other things than just, relay spam. And the second thing that's kind of, I won't say disappointing, but is a concern, is that according to the National Cybersecurity Alliance, 71% of consumers have never heard of this term. And I can confirm this number because I do this presentation a number of times a month, and every time I do, I query before I put the statistic up how many people have actually heard of botnets. And I would say this number is quite accurate. And that's why it's so important that we understand what the risks are. And as a user of the internet, whether we're personal user or a user in our businesses, we understand what these risks are. So the next section is on social engineering, which is the non-technical means to be able to enumerate information. So instead of trying to take over your machine and pull your credit card that way, a social engineering attempt would be able to call you and pretend to be the credit card company and ask you for your credit card. And it's not just from a personal standpoint, but in businesses as well. Our group and Verizon Business and others who do security consulting will do these social engineering exercises to customers to be able to see that the help desk is appropriately authenticating users and not giving out the information that they shouldn't. So it can be done via the phone, it can be done via email, and they're, again, being very sophisticated in what topics they'll use that they think we're going to fall for. We just had we're going through a large election, and something related to that, the campaigns might be something that they may be able to, a user may want to click, whereas if it's something for a certain drug or some stock scheme or something like that, they may be less inclined to do that. The other thing that we can do is spoof internal emails. If there's some insecurities in the way that the mail server is set up within an organization, there might be a way for us to pretend like their email is coming from inside and request information from somebody that they think may be coming from an administrator or a manager or something like that. And every business presentation needs to have some kind of Gartner statistic. Last year they said that $3.2 billion was lost to phishing in 2007, just as a concept itself. And then finally, on-site. There's a number of ways, whether you're entering in the back door with the smokers and tailgating people as they come into the building, whether you're printing to do deliveries. There's a number of things that you can do to get into a building and be able to get access to machines. One of my favorite stories is a fellow security consultancy up in Syracuse who did for a medical lab, put around 20 little USB drives around the outside first thing in the morning in the parking lot and the lobby where the smokers hang out. And by the end of the day, 15 of those 20 were actually plugged into computers within the organization. The reason why they know that is the group had a script on each of those USB drives to phone back to their office, across the internet to say, hey, this was plugged in, this was the IP address, this is the kind of machine that was plugged into, and that could have had any kind of malicious software on there. They were just testing to see what people would do. So it's very important that everyone as individuals understand their role and be able to managing risk within their organizations and their own personal lives. Spam is still very prevalent. And recently someone said that maybe I get rid of this statistic because it's kind of old from November 2003. And I said, I like this because it's actually the older it gets, the more poignant it is. And that, one of the marketing folks at Microsoft had stated that Microsoft believes that in a couple of years that spam will kind of dissipate. It's a flash in the pan, there'll be technology that'll make it go away, people aren't going to fall for it anymore. And it's obviously not going. This is 94% of all email is spam. This is another one of the statistics that when I talk to customers, I'll ask them. I said, how much of the email coming to your organization is spam? And I can confirm that this is about true just from my own personal queries. And of course, these numbers are very apparent if you look at the anti-spam vendors and their statistics. This is where this comes from. Some of the trends that we're seeing in spam, image-based spam, which I have a slide on next, which is, instead of having text, but they'll post an image to try to get by some of the filters, is quite a challenge because it's much bigger in the message size, which sucks up more bandwidth and takes up more disk space, and it makes it a little tougher to be able to capture it. And I'll show you some examples of that. Targeting small numbers of emails, we call it spearfishing. So if spearfishing is one example. Targeting a small number to get under the radar, they look at the thresholds and they know if I see it from 10,000 people, then that'll catch it as spam. If it's 100 people, then it won't be identified as spam. So they're looking at these different thresholds. Spearfishing is if I know that, for instance, the 30 people in this room all bought something from Best Buy in the last couple of weeks because I enumerated through some other means, then I will target them and say, hey, this is in reference to your recent purchase at Best Buy, for instance. And so that's spearfishing. It's to a very specific group of folks from a very specific organization or topic or event that they did. There was recently, in the last couple months, one from the Better Business Bureau to a bunch of CEOs of corporations around some kind of case against their company. And if they eventually followed all the trails and hit all the links, it would say that it's been resolved and there's no further action required on their part. But in each of these different steps, from the email to the website to all the different things they link, links they click, they're trying to infect that CEO's laptop or something like that. And so again, it's definitely a targeted attack. So talking about image-based spam, there is a great trend in how they're trying to get around the spam filter. So image-based spam first came up because the antivirus, the spam filters would look for certain words, drugs or pharmaceuticals or stocks or something like that, and block it. So they found that if they put it in an image, they can't read the image. Well, after some R&D and some time, the spam filter company said, all right, well, I'm going to hash this image, so if I see this image anywhere else, then I know it's spam. And then I'm going to also read the image by OC using optical character recognition and look for these words that I don't like. Well, as soon as they figured that out and the spammers stopped getting their emails sent, then they started very quickly to obfuscate things. They started cutting the words, making it tougher to OCR during the background, so it was harder to grab which were actually the letters, and also making individual images that had confetti in the background, so you couldn't just hash a specific image and say, if I see this image. So, and they probably did this over a weekend. So then the spam filters had to do other things to be able to block these, and then the cyber criminals got a little more creative. This is a dynamic image with floating balls in the background. This is actually a PDF that is attached to an email, which looks perfectly legitimate. This was from last year, a pump and dump scheme, which is a stock scheme where someone will send out an email hyping some penny stock that they already bought a bunch, usually with someone else's money, and then get people to buy it, make a couple cents, go up a couple cents, and then make some money off of it. So we see this as an example, and then utilizing the botnet, be able to create three-dimensional images that are rendered and sent every single time with new speckling, so they're a unique image every single time as well, that will make it a lot tougher for them to be able to capture. So they're utilizing not only their botnet's capability and the tens of thousands of machines they have to be able to render these three-dimensional images, but also to send them out. Then in the last couple of months, we saw this, which is a WAV file, which is an audio file. So like the image originally you couldn't read because it was an image, now the spam filter is going to need to start listening and saying, trying to have character recognition from voice character recognition. That's kind of interesting. This was actually, I think, for a pharmaceutical thing, Sell Viagra or something like that. But it was titled as an Elvis song, and unless you listened to it, you didn't know what it was. So you can see this is a very interesting cat and mouse game, because these folks, this is how they get paid. And it doesn't take a lot in Romania, Slovakia, Ukraine, or Russia. You know, making $10,000 is quite a good wage for them. And so, you know, they're willing to do these small things to be able to get some money. And, you know, for every time that it takes a spam company a couple months and a couple $1 million to be able to block what they do next, it takes them maybe a few hours or a weekend to figure out how to get around it. One of the most important things about individuals, about the trends today, is that we're being a lot more mobile. And everybody in organizations now are pretty much getting laptops so they can, you know, take them home and work remotely. Folks who travel a lot are in hotspots in airports and hotels and coffee shops and things like that. And what they need to understand is the risks that they have, and not from wireless as in there's insecurities in wireless, but the fact that wireless exists, and it's as you know, brings some vulnerabilities that people aren't really thinking about. And so what I want to highlight in this presentation was some of those. So another security group in Midwest went to Chicago O'Hare Airport and looked for different wireless access points, because in O'Hare there's free wire, or I don't think it's free, but there's wireless access there as in all the airports around the country. But they found that 90% of them were not really the legitimate airport Wi-Fi, but actually someone imitating it. And one of the reasons you can tell, see this example, it says free airport Wi-Fi, but what you'll notice if you look closely here is it's insecure computer-to-computer network. If this were really the legitimate one, it would be a wireless network as identified here. So it's important that before we connect to anything, that we look closely at some of these different indicators. And one of the interesting things, particularly in Windows itself, is it's a very aggressive wireless network finder. Every single wireless network you've ever attached to is stored in your registry. And when you turn on your machine and your wireless card, it will go through every single one of those to look for if it's nearby and automatically connect to it. Now, hackers will take advantage of that. And there are hacker tools to be able to lure people if they say, okay, I'm T-Mobile, and it's like, oh, I'm T-Mobile, I'll connect to you, and automatically connect them to it. But little known fact is that Microsoft actually patched this this ability to prevent made a patch to prevent the ability to do that in January of 2007. They didn't make a big deal about it, but I wanted to show it to you here what you can now do to prevent these kinds of things from happening. So you don't turn on your machine and automatically connect to a name of an access point you connected to before and be connected to some rogue access point. So in your wireless settings, in your Windows box, if you hit the Advanced button here, what they've added is the ability to turn on so I can only attach to access points, which is what you probably would want to set to. Default is any available network. So in the example I gave before, if it was a rogue wireless airport access point and it's really someone's laptop, it wouldn't connect to it if you had the setting there. And then in the area where you have all of your different previously connected access points, first go through and clean through that and ones you don't use, and delete the ones you're not going to use so it's not advertising that you're trying to connect to those. But if you click on the properties of each of these, there's a connection box which is connected by default to say, connect this when the network is in range. And so that will prevent from automatically connecting to, let's say, the T-Mobile hotspot when you're in an airport or something like that. And it might be someone who's imitating a T-Mobile hotspot, and they may even put up a web page to ask for your credit card number and maybe even proxy you to the internet. But you really don't want that. So, you know, turn this off, and you'll see here that the connection will now be changed from automatic to on demand. And so particularly in this case, like with Hilton Honors, you know, want to make sure that before a machine connects to it, that you look to see it's not a computer-to-computer network, and that it's, you know, you've at least noticed that there isn't 3 other Hilton Honors there, and you need to figure out which one is the legitimate one. So this is a very important thing for people to at least be aware of, and here are some tools to be able to protect yourself. And for your organizations, make sure that these things are implemented so that users are aware of them, and these settings are pushed down to all of the laptops to be able to protect them. My next section is on malware, and pretty much a lot of what I've talked about is malware, and that's the viruses and worms and Trojans and things like that. And the important thing, as I'm trying to, the point I'm getting across, is the user education is so key. In this particular survey of 2,000 people, and this was in spring of this year, consisting of a lot of IT workers as well, not just lay people. They said that 56% thought the internet is safer today than it was before. And that's kind of disturbing to me as a risk management person, because it really is not. But the reason why it seems safer is because we're not seeing these big, the things we're seeing more in the news are about laptops being stolen or credit cards stolen from, merchants who maybe not protected themselves appropriately, and not that, the internet is, a safer place, when actually they're being attacked by some of the methods I described below, before. And another survey from late last year, the National Cybersecurity Round, said that 30% of people believe they had more chance of being struck by lightning than being a victim of computer crime. So I went and I got the statistic on that. And here in the United States, the National Weather Service said you have 4 zeros before you get to a 1% chance of being hit by lightning in the US. Whereas an eCrime Watch survey said you have a 70% chance of being a victim of some kind of computer crime, virus, phishing attack, or something like that. And what this really illustrates is kind of the difference between managing security and managing risk. And security is really an emotion, is your freedom from anxiety or fear, whereas risk is actually a probability of some kind of loss or theft or injury or thing like that, which can be measured. And so a lot of folks, by their feeling, they feel it's more secure because they're not as worried about it anymore, probably because we're more used to the different things that we read about and hear on the news about, credit card thefts and things like that. And so we're not as afraid of it. But in reality, if we looked at it from a risk standpoint, the probability is much, much higher, and the threat vectors are very great. And so that's an important distinction when talking within your organization or even talking to your friends and family, that are you doing it because you feel like it's something to do, or whether statistically it actually is more dangerous. One of the interesting statistics sticking to the user education topic is that in one of the online surveys from late last year, 11% of respondents admitted to buying goods sold via spam. And that's quite interesting. The things that, spam as an engine does many things. It's, first to market whatever they're trying to sell, and second is to try to infect the user. And if 11% of the people, and there's 400 million people on the internet at one given time as individuals, that's still a large number. And so that's why it still works, and that's still why the circle of life can happen with spam, because obviously it's working. If we stop buying stuff from spam, we stop looking at it, then perhaps it would go away. One of the other areas that cybercriminals are focusing on is, again, in being specific to what users are looking for. And anti-spyware is a very hot thing because, as we see, malware is one of the main vectors that they're using. And ironically, 80% of the advertising anti-spyware is actually intended to infect you. In fact, these botnet operators, when they infect a machine, they will use anti-spyware to clean the machine up. And then they'll go patch the machine and update it to make sure that it's protected so some other bot herder can't take it over. And so they use these anti-spyware packages, and sometimes they'll use the tool that they created to do that as some kind of passing it off as a legitimate product. So people, when they go into Google and search for anti-spyware, the first 7 that they list are not real products, but products made by these criminal groups that will probably clean your machine up, but they'll leave the one that they want to leave on your machine. So we're going to play a little game called Can You Tell the Difference Between Real and Rogue? And so here are 6 different anti-spyware packages, of which only 2 are real. The first one is Drive Cleaner 2006. The second one is IE Defender 2.2. Next is Super Anti-Spyware. Spy Shield by the spyshield.org. Spybot Search and Destroy. And finally, System Doctor 2006. So 4 of these are fake. And the way you can tell they're fake is if you went to Google and put in the name of one of these, you will see 10 references of how to get this particular product out of your registry, or how to remove it from your computer after an infection. Whereas the 2 that are legitimate, which I will show to you as being Spybot Search and Destroy, which everyone knows about, and the one with the cheesy name, Super Anti-Spyware, which is a great product, These two are legitimate. And if you looked under Google for one of these, you would see CNET reports, PC Magazine reviews, Information World, all these different reviews of spyware packages, ranking these as very commendable products. If you put in Drive Cleaner 2006 into Google, again, you'll find stories about Drive Cleaner infecting the machine and different ways that you can do to get it out of your system. And it's a very important thing to do with all the software you download. If you don't know it from some tool or helper app or codec for a certain movie that you're trying to find, search for it first, and you'll find very quickly whether or not it's something that's malicious, because there'll be a lot of references to it one way or the other. One of my favorite, just not because it's a good thing, but because it's an interesting thing, malware is ransomware. And this, ironically, is really a summertime event. And the first time I saw this is in summer of 2006. And what it is a Trojan will come in and encrypt your hard drive. And then it will leave a note saying, please give me some money and I'll give you the password. The first time we saw this in 2006, it's called the Zippo Trojan. And it was really using a very weak version of encryption. The password was embedded in the source code, and it really wasn't that sophisticated. And what they did is they asked you for $300 sent to an eGold account. And at the time, I never heard of eGold in 2006, and I looked it up, and it's this place in Europe where online financial site where you can do trading in gold bullion to get around that pesky exchange rate thing. It's all gold to gold. So if anyone ever asks you to buy something off of eBay and use eGold, then it may not be a legitimate thing. So I first saw this, and then after a few months I hadn't heard anything about it again. I was getting ready to take it out of this presentation when then in summer of 2007, the Gp Code Trojan came out. And it was a little bit more sophisticated. It was kind of a good news, bad news thing. The bad news was that they use RSA encryption, even gave you a link to Wikipedia to describe what RSA encryption is, so we weren't going to bust that. But the good news was they still kept the price at $300, which I thought was very nice of them. Well, I was just doing this a couple of weeks ago, and I was just saying that this is a summertime thing, and I'm sure it will happen soon. Well, 3 days ago, Friday on June 8th or whatever it was, we saw this. And it's the Gp Code AK, the AK updated version of it. They've improved the interface a little bit. They instead of a message, they pop up. Instead of a letter, they pop up a message saying, your files are encrypted with RSA 124-bit encryption. We cover you need a buyer decryptor to buy it. Go to this, email us, and then we'll give it. Now, I think they probably wanted to adjust the price a little bit to be how bad you want it, and maybe barter a little bit. But just when I was thinking this wasn't going to happen again, it happened again. So maybe it's some Romanian student who just got out of school and this is how he makes his summer money or something like that. But that's why it's kind of an interesting one to me. The focus of this is really user education. And understanding and managing risk to an organization or risk to yourself is really a people problem. And there's a CSO of a large publisher in New York that says the carbon-based unit within the process is the weakest link. And this is an example of that. The Oregon Department of Revenue, probably it's a year and a half old, they had a user who was a data entry clerk, and he was entering all this information about all of these individuals in Oregon. Well, during his lunch break or some break, he decided to download some porno video, and it infected the machine. They identified that he did that. They fired him, and when the IT folks were looking at his machine, they found that it was running very slow. So they ran an anti-spyware package against it, a legitimate run, of course, and found that he was infected. They looked at what the Trojan did, and it was a Keystroke Logger. And then their hearts sank, because this guy was a data entry clerk. And so 2,300 people had all their information that he was typing in sent to somewhere, Russia, Ukraine, somewhere like that, and all their information they had to disclose. And this is from a user who didn't realize that they were doing something that was introducing insecurity into the organization. And Gartner, another Gartner statistic here, by the end of 2007, which I'll have to see how true this is now since we're in 2008, 75% of enterprises will be infected by some undetected, financially motivated attack. And one of the things that this also kind of comes in to realize is that the risk to this, even if a user makes a mistake, it can be costly. And so FaceTime, in their survey, they found that it's almost $300,000 annually that IT groups are using to clean up machines from these kind of malicious infections that could probably be easily prevented if users behaved and were, not because they were bad, but because they knew better and did things that were more secure and not things that were less secure. So these are usually unbudgeted expenses that they are going to have to incur. One of my last sections here is on social networking. And social networking, I'll just kind of pop up a bunch of logos to let you know what I mean by that. And these are everywhere from MySpace to web-based conferencing to file sharing software to a voice over IP to web-based email and things like that, chat. This is Web 4.0. This is where we are getting into more collaboration, more communication. And these can introduce risk, and I'll show you how that is. Because when users are going to these different sites, they are kind of opening a channel into their computer through the organization, or if they're outside the organization in an airport, for instance. So for instance, this woman is protected by the corporate security controls from these malicious things that I've been talking about. But when she goes and surfs the web, and she may be inside her company, and they may allow her to go to her Gmail account or allow her to go to MySpace, it introduces the ability to have a backdoor that's unchecked to be able to get some of these different types of malicious software on a computer. So I show you examples from MySpace with malicious banners ads. There could be viruses attached to web-based email. BitTorrent, which shares files, can download some infected video. Second Life, as we saw, has good way for laundering money, and there's different things that people can do to infect folks there. And if an organization allows people to go to these, then they need to realize that there might be some back channel that is not protected. And similarly, if she is, like I said, in a hotspot somewhere on her laptop, is even greater risk exposure. An example of this, again, a people problem. In Tokyo, about a year ago, there was a policeman who went to Winnie, which is a file sharing site, downloaded probably a large movie, and was infected. And his machine had over 6,000 police documents on it that were then compromised from that. Remember earlier on I said that, well, how come, why antivirus isn't the be-all, end-all for it? And, when people say, I have my updated antivirus and I keep the signatures, updated every single time I'm allowed to, why would that not protect me? Well, this is one of 3 different hacker tools that the hackers use if I'm a malcode writer to be able to test their code to make sure that the antivirus packages aren't going to catch it. Here's one, here's another one in a different language, and then here's a third one, I think in probably Portuguese, that have every single one of the signature engines for the antivirus packages. And then if I write a malicious piece of code, I'm going to run this against my code. And it will say, okay, McAfee found it, Kapatsuki found it, Norton didn't find it, Bitdefender found it, etc. And I'll modify it and so that all of these are 0 or whatever percentage I feel, like 90% of them don't catch it, and then I'll release it. Now, keep in mind, this is just the signature engines. Each of these packages have other heuristic things that when they're installed, look to see if something is checking registry or came from some different area that would block something as identified as some malicious code. But just keep in mind that the signature engines themselves, the answers to the test are given to the hackers, and they know how to get around them. So that's one of the reasons why it can't be completely trusted. It's just one of the pieces of a many-layered approach. And the most important layer, I'll say again, is user education. The FBI did a report a few years ago, and they combined all of the statistics to be able to look at how much computer crime, looking from the outside, is costing organizations. And 62 billion was the number. This was a couple years ago. It's probably increased by now. I haven't found really solid this number in solidly put together like I did back when this happened. But around the time this happened, I wanted to compare this to what internal threat was, because as a security person, I've always known internal threat is greater. Well, the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners looked at internal attacks, and they estimated it cost $400 billion. And that's a much bigger number than 62. I looked at a more current, just a couple weeks ago, report of this. They hadn't really rolled it up into one number, but this number has gone up and this number has gone up proportionally. And so the insider threat is great because insiders have more access to information, and it's not necessarily that they mean to do something with it, but because they have the access, it's easier to do something, intentionally or unintentionally. Which kind of brings me to data loss. And in looking at data loss, the challenge with data loss is comparing it to regular theft. If this guy steals his computer and I walk by, I turn around, the computer's gone, it was stolen. I know that. But if my data is sitting there and someone goes and steals it and I turn around, did you see that? Was it stolen? I don't know. It's still there. So how do I prove that? And that's kind of a challenge. And we have technology and we have process to be able to kind of manage this risk, but it certainly makes it a lot tougher than before. And above all of this, going on from the insider threat thing, whether someone unintentionally exposed information, if they start to type and send a sensitive document to somebody named Rick and my name fills in and sends it to me by accident, completely unintentional, I didn't mean to, or in the case of an intentional exposure without malice, someone's like, well, I need to get this out, but my server won't let me send out a zip file and executable, so I'm going to change the extension to ABC and have the person, or if something sent to me, change it to get through the mail system. Or someone has a targeted attack and maliciously wants to get that information. It's all the same risk. So whether she sent it out by accident, he sent it out intentionally, but he did it by violating policy, or this person got the information, it's all the same risk to the organization because risk is irrelevant of intent. And that's such an important thing within an organization to understand, and something that we as humans have a hard time resolving. Early in security with the internet, we just figured we'd put a firewall up and we'll protect ourselves from the bad people on the outside, and I trust all the people inside. But we need to realize that even though we trust them, they can go bad, like a potato salad's been left out, or they can do something that is a mistake, because humans are, not perfect. And whether it's intentional or unintentional, and in the example of the organ of partner revenue, it's still the same risk to the organization. A good illustration of this is in Alaska last year. A hard drive with $38 billion of account information was formatted. And the backup was formatted. I don't know what he did, but somehow all the data couldn't be recovered. The backup tapes exist, but they were probably frozen or something, and no one checked to see if they fit in the machine, and they were unreadable. So what they had to do was, fortunately, the 800,000 records were still in boxes stored somewhere in the snow, and 300 boxes, actually. 70 people, round the clock, 2 months, $200,000 unbudgeted expense. Now, this was a mistake. If a hacker came in and gave ransomware and encrypted the hard drive like we saw before, it would still be the same result. So risk is irrelevant of intent. As far as data theft goes, we live in a world where we have lots of great spy toys. James Bond would love to have the kinds of things we have today. This spy camera, I can take a picture and email it immediately anywhere around the world. James Bond had this little 110 that he had to take these pictures and make sure the light was good and develop it later. And similarly, all the cameras have video option. So I could just hold my camera up and pretend like I'm texting my wife and really videotape you type in your password or your PIN number at the ATM. There's lots of great things you can do with it. And cybercriminals are doing that, I can assure you. Data leaving the space, we have USB drives now that hold a lot of information. And they can be in a bracelet, earrings, on a watch, in a pen. iPods nowadays carry 80 gig of information. And these are all areas where data can leave the space physically. Another area that people aren't thinking about is these wireless headsets that admins and some help desks and some call center folks have. Depending on what technology they are, if you have a police scanner, you can listen in on these kinds of calls. And so an admin for a CEO that may have one of these might be saying something pretty sensitive. And so be aware of what risk you're taking and make sure the technology is appropriately securing what you need to do. And then there's this little barrel about this big that fits between a keyboard and a CPU of a computer. This is a keystroke logger. And this would have been, this was the thing that would have been part of the largest bank heist in the history of the world. $500 million in London was almost stolen because of these little things. The criminal group paid the cleaning crew to go install these in specific computers. All they had to do was unplug the the keyboard, put this thing in, and plug it in. And then the next night, retrieve it. And all the keystrokes from that keyboard were stored on that little device where they could get the passwords for these very large funds transfer applications. Well, eventually, the folks were caught later on when they tried to actually execute against it. But these things were, are out there, and they're very small, and they can also be set to email out if you don't have physical access again. Incidentally, the banks, what's been told was the bank's remediation of this is they superglued all the keyboards to CPUs after this to make sure it didn't happen again. And these are easy to find. ThinkGeek.com sells them anywhere from $90 to $100 depending on the size. And from what I hear, these are very popular with current and future ex-spouses for some reason. But it's out there. It's a tool that folks can use for good, for evil, for whatever purposes, and you need to be aware of it. The other thing to be aware of is that a lot of times we are the ones who are giving the data away. And throwing away the data, some folks are recycling their computers. This was a European, a bank in the UK who thought they were recycling computers, but they ended up in some Nigerian landfill where people were opening them up and mining for data within the hard drives to use for the Nigerian 419 scam, which is the, hi, I'm the prince, I'm giving you $1 million transfer to your account, et cetera, et cetera. So they did that. And then it not necessarily happened to be, digital data as well. The Indian, as in the country of India, Council of San Francisco last year had thrown away a bunch of boxes of files and are sitting in a landfill. And so sometimes this data, which whether it's electronic form or in paper form, it's the same data, it's the same risk to the organization, and particularly to these people. And so it's important to understand that. And then finally, as we move to more mobile devices, we all carry these devices. They have our email, they have different address lists, they have phone numbers, they have sometimes personal information on them. We are not either disposing of these correctly or wiping them or keeping them encrypted because we trust them too much. And it's important to keep in mind that we'll be giving these away, and where is the data coming from? What can someone do with the data that's on that? So keep in mind with these devices as well. So my final section is on defending and protecting yourself. So I have a couple of things, a couple of slides here on focus on the individual, to be able to go home and be able to do these things to be a little bit more secure in cyberspace. One of them is with email. Obviously don't open unknown email attachments, and make sure you don't send personal information in the email. We know that. But the preview panel, if you are someone who gets a lot of spam, turn the preview panel off. Because any of these different things, and remember the very first slide was an infection of a web page, and this is really HTML. This is like a web page. It's being rendered, and because it's Microsoft Explorer by Internet Explorer, Outlook, it's Internet Explorer that's actually rendering this. And so if there's some malicious scripting on this page, while this is rendered, it can infect your machine. So turn off the preview panel. If you see a bunch of spam, delete, delete, delete. Don't wait for it to go. Now, if you don't get a lot of spam and you use the preview panel to help be more productive, then don't turn it off. In the machine itself, there is a number of things you can do for being able to be more secure. Personal firewall, antivirus, real anti-spyware, patches up to date, secure Explorer settings or Firefox settings or Safari settings for your, well, Safari is not so much, not have to worry about as much. So these are some of the exploits, and don't be the administrator. This is a very key thing, because if someone infects your machine and the user that you're running as has access to all of the operating system, then they can do a lot more damage than if it's a lesser user that can't install applications, access the registry, touch your host file, things like that. These last two are very, very important to be proactive. If these things fail, these are the things that are going to help save you. And teach users good passwords. Use good passwords your own. Of all the years that I've been doing testing of systems and applications, the most common thing that we found to get in is some default password or weak password on a system, application, user interface, and things like that. I can't tell you how important that is. The second area is just in understanding, downloading programs from websites you trust and then validating them. And, check Google to look to see if there's anything bad said about that application. Some of the applications actually contain spyware, and sometimes they're in the license agreement. And it's not a malicious thing, but it's more of just tracking where you're going afterwards, and you agree to it when you sign the license agreement. So you may want to check into that. use caution when closing windows. If this happens to one of your coworkers and you get all this flood of pop-ups, either use the little X's or even better yet, go down to control panel and click close, 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 close. Don't click on one of the things that says, oh, click here to details or click here to close, because that's just going to lure you farther in. And most importantly, if it's too good to be true, if there's some kind of spam or scam or something that will sell you a plasma screen for $500 or work at home, no selling involved, just cash these foreign cashier's checks, you know there's a problem. And so, do your research before you get into anything. My final slide is to talk a little bit about Verizon Business Security Services. We have a number of services around being able to help our customers, and we deal with many, many customers around the world. Even though we're a large telco, we have probably the largest security consultancy in the world. And we do it by doing vulnerability and penetration testing, which kind of links into some of the things that I talked about, the hacking risks, the social engineering risks, and malware risks, against applications and networks and systems, against voice over IP infrastructures and other infrastructures. When there is a breach, we have a very strong capability in incident response and forensics. And that's when there is a problem, we'll find out what happened, how did it happen, make it stop, and make sure it doesn't happen again. And we do this a lot with the retail industry. And a lot of the very large publicized breaches you've seen in the retail industry around credit card thefts, we've had involved in finding out what happened and making sure that it stops. And in some cases, actually getting convictions out of it. Data discovery and partner security. We really live in a place where there is no inside and outside anymore. That extended enterprise of where your data is going. So we help customers in identifying what that data is and classifying it, where it's located and where it goes. And then validating that the partners who may share this data or who have access to it are securing at the same level that you as an organization want it to be secured. And then program reviews and compliance reviews. Whether or not you're doing, have policies in place to be able to protect all the things you need to protect, doing the right things to the right level, and also for compliance. We have a very strong PCI compliance for retail industry, banking, and card merchants, where we go through and make sure that the folks are doing everything they're supposed to do to be compliant with this, and just as an example, and other compliance as well for HIPAA, GLBA, SOX, those kinds of things, making sure that the security program is robust enough. So professional services is pretty much consultants doing work, and managed security services is remotely monitoring and managing devices you either have on your premise or ones that we have on your behalf that are stored in the cloud. The first which is distributed denial service mitigation. Remember, the botnets may all take all 50,000 of them and aim them at one organization to try to starve its resources. It's a very hard thing to stop because they're coming from 50,000 different IP addresses. Well, we have technology in the cloud to be able to mitigate this, and some of the largest e-commerce sites in the world rely on us, who use our lines for their internet access, to be able to protect them from this kind of risk. The second is managing the email content and spam, and also the web content. So within an organization, in the cloud, we'll block that 94% of all the email that's spam in the cloud before it sucks up your bandwidth, and be able to provide no spam, no viruses, and a much more pleasant email experience. Web content filtering is kind of where the opposite, where users are going out to the internet, similar to the woman who was being protected by her corporate controls, but then had a risk when going to different sites like web-based email. What web content filtering is the same kind of scrubbing engine that when a user goes out to the internet and maybe goes to web-based email, if there's a virus that they're trying to download, it'll be identified and scrubbed before coming back down. It's a proxy that they go through to get to the internet. Or if they go to a site that may have some malicious content, a drive-by download, it'll catch it and filter it before infecting the user. So these are very important in protecting your organization. Managed devices, so whether it's a firewall, intrusion detection, intrusion prevention device, on your premise that you're using, we will take over managing the device itself and monitoring the logs and providing a process for you to be alerted when you need to respond to something. Verizon Business has more devices on the planet that we manage than anyone else in the world with our organization. And then finally, for remote users, whether it's strong authentication to access or internally, and providing SSL VPN services, we have these to be able to make sure that any access method within the organization can be protected to a level, to make sure that you can lock down all the different areas of threat, spin it around, and close the door and protect yourself. I hope you found this informative. Thank you very much for your time.